no denying that there was a lot of suspicious photographs and moments with the baby bump when she was with the royal family. That is a fact. And there is no way around how strange the bump looked throughout the pregnancy.
Could Meghan Markle's pregnancy have been fake?
In the midst of a tense private meeting of the royal family prince, Harry suddenly slapped Meghan Markle the moment the DNA results of Archie and Lilibet were placed on the table. According to witnesses, the room felt as though it had frozen over. Time itself seemed to stop. King Charles didn't utter a word, immediately stood up and stormed out of the room. William sat in stunned silence, his eyes locked on the tabletop. Meghan screamed something and bolted from the meeting, while Harry sank heavily into his chair, his hand trembling as it clutched the fateful piece of paper. The question was not only why Harry would lay a hand on the woman who once meant everything to him, but more crucially, what exactly was written on that paper that could rip apart the trust, honor, and very foundation of an entire family's existence. Was that the moment when every lie, if there had ever been any, finally had nowhere left to hide? And if the truth about bloodlines was indeed what exploded within that room, then what comes next for Meghan, for Harry, and for the royal institution they once belonged to? Part 1, the chaotic meeting. That Monday morning, a meeting was called without warning. It was not on any official schedule, and no notice had been given to lower-ranking palace staff. According to a longtime servant at Clarence House, only those with real influence were summoned to that meeting room. The list included King Charles, Prince William, Princess Kate, two of the royal family's official lawyers, and Harry and Meghan. No media representatives were allowed in, no press aides, and absolutely no cameras permitted. Every attendee received only a single reminder: this meeting was for the security and honor of the Windsor family. From the very first moment, the tension in the room was taut as a tightened string. Meghan entered last, her face cold, but her eyes betraying a trace of caution. Harry, on the other hand, seemed unable to take his eyes off his father, King Charles. On the table lay a white envelope bearing no royal insignia or markings. One of the lawyers was the first to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a personal document, but one that directly and seriously impacts the image of the entire family." Inside the envelope was a DNA test report conducted by a reputable center in the United States at the personal request of a family member, and notably without Meghan's consent or signature, during the sample collection process. Harry took the results. At first, he read in silence, his eyes slowly scanning the printed lines, but within seconds his hand began to tighten. His throat moved slightly, but no words came. Around 40 seconds passed in heavy silence before Harry finally spoke, his voice louder than usual. "Meghan, what is this?" No one in the room responded. Meghan maintained her blank expression, offered no reply, and did not blink. Just moments later, Harry raised the paper high in his hand, his voice now strained with anger. "You've been lying to me all these years." Meghan still said nothing, and it was that silence, it seemed, that broke him. Harry abruptly stood, stormed across the room toward Meghan, who was seated across from him, and according to witness accounts, a sharp sound rang out like a crack slicing through the solemn atmosphere of that historic chamber. In front of his father, brother, sister-in-law, and the royal family's top advisors. Prince Harry slapped Meghan. Meghan screamed, but not out of pain. She cried out in fury, her voice choked with emotion, as she staggered backward. "So you're just going to blame everything on me?" Without waiting another second, she spun around, shoved open the door, and stormed out. The wooden door closing behind her sounded like a final warning bell. King Charles raised a hand to his forehead, stood silently, and exited the room without uttering a word. William bowed his head, his gaze frozen. Kate turned away, avoiding eye contact with her sister-in-law, who had just walked out of the chamber. The silence in the grand meeting room was suffocating. What could possibly be in that DNA report that held the power to make a man like Harry, who once gave up his title, his family, even his country, completely lose control? According to leaked information that surfaced later, the test results revealed Archie does not carry Harry's full genetic markers, and Lilibet showed several discrepancies that did not align entirely with either of the two presumed parents. While no one disclosed the technical specifics, the phrase "unable to confirm clear paternity" was repeatedly mentioned in subsequent discussions. No one questioned why this DNA test had been conducted. No one asked why the results were revealed at that precise moment. But all eyes turned to Harry, the man who had stood by Meghan during her most turbulent years. And now there, he sat, his face, pale hands gripping that cold sheet of paper, and one slap hanging in the air like hundreds of unanswered questions. One unavoidable question quietly surfaced in everyone's mind. If Meghan truly had nothing to hide, why did she stay silent? If it was just a misunderstanding, why not demand a retest to clear everything up? And if there was nothing to be concealed, why walk away instead of staying to prove her innocence? Part 2: What hides behind the DNA paper. Right after Meghan left the meeting room in tears, those who remained, from King Charles to the highest-ranking advisors, were enveloped in absolute silence. No one spoke, not merely because of the unexpected slap, and not entirely due to Harry's outburst of anger, but because of the thin sheet of paper still lying open on the table, like an open wound that had yet to stop bleeding. A document that just minutes earlier had already possessed the power to make a father and a prince lose all control, something almost unheard of within the tightly guarded walls of the Windsor family. According to a close source, the DNA test document did not originate from an official request by Harry or Meghan. It was sent from a private medical center in the United States renowned for its advanced genetic analysis, and was reportedly requested by a third party in secret, possibly a relative within the lineage or a legal group operating behind the scenes. It was a risky move, if not outright reckless, in a context where for years the royal family had deliberately avoided any public debate concerning the paternity of Harry's 2 children. To this day, the detailed content of that document remains a publicly undisclosed mystery. No confirmations have been made by those involved, and no copies have been leaked. However, Harry's explosive reaction inadvertently revealed that whatever was written in that paper carried tremendous emotional weight enough to deeply shake the heart of a father, a husband, and a man who had once given up everything for the family he believed in. Inside the meeting room, a quiet question began to circulate among those present. What exactly was written in it? Could it have been inconclusive, neither affirming nor denying a murky gray zone where there wasn't enough to declare betrayal, but more than enough to send the trust of a man who once risked it all into a tailspin? There is one undeniable fact: Meghan had never appeared comfortable with suggestions involving paternity testing or the public release of medical records. While Princess Kate gave birth at St. Mary's Hospital, where every procedure was transparent to both media and the public, Meghan chose a private medical facility in the U.S., withheld the names of attending doctors, released no official photographs upon discharge, and shared no verification documents with the public. While these could all be attributed to valid personal privacy under the royal lens, which values ritual tradition and transparency, these details had long been viewed as inexplicable anomalies. Moreover, in interviews with Oprah and various American media outlets, Meghan publicly stated that her children were denied the titles of prince and princess due to underlying prejudice within the royal family. Yet according to a decree issued by King George V in 1917, such titles are only granted automatically when their grandfather, in this case King Charles, formally ascends the throne. Before that point, Harry's children had no legal entitlement to royal titles. So could there be a gap between the legal truth and what Meghan once declared to the world? Some sources even suggested that the DNA test presented that day might not have been the final conclusion. It may have only been a preliminary result, incomplete or indicative, rather than definitive, such as lower than expected paternity match percentages, technical discrepancies due to sample preservation conditions, or insufficient data, resulting from the mother's non-cooperation, a possibility quietly discussed among Harry's closest confidants. If that were the case, if it wasn't a definitive sentence but merely a troubling signal, then was Harry's loss of control purely emotional? Or did he suddenly realize he had been drawn into a much larger game, one where he was no longer sure if he was a pawn, a player, or merely someone being used? A global media strategist once said, "In image crises, the most dangerous thing isn't the truth, it's the absence of transparency. When the public can't tell what's real, they begin to doubt everything." And for figures like Meghan, that doubt alone is enough to burn down an entire image built through years of careful construction. That is why, regardless of what the paper truly said that day, it has already become the spark that ignited an irreversible quake. It didn't just shatter a single meeting. It raised countless questions about things that once seemed certain. Harry's love for his wife and children, the true parentage of the two children, Meghan's departure from the royal family, and the real value behind everything she ever said before millions around the world. Because when truth is obscured, trust is the first casualty. And within the royal family, where every title, every status, and every standard revolves around the legitimacy of bloodlines, even one inconclusive document is enough to shake the foundation of power and belief that has endured for centuries. Part 3. What role does Meghan play? No one can deny that from the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the British royal family, she brought with her a completely different kind of energy. She wasn't like anyone who had entered that power structure before, not timid, not molded by protocol, and certainly not someone to hide behind outdated formalities. Meghan is the type who takes initiative, speaks out, knows how to navigate situations, and perhaps most importantly, knows how to control. Control her image, control the narrative, and control the public's perception of who she is. But now, with a vague DNA test threatening to collapse the entire foundation she so carefully built, people are beginning to wonder. In her marriage to Harry, was Meghan truly a partner, or was she the one in control? From the very start of their engagement, Meghan drew massive attention not only for her Hollywood background, but for how she and Harry appeared together as a new generation royal couple, breaking old traditions, saying things never said before, showing affection publicly, and most of all daring to leave their royal roles behind to pursue a life true to themselves. However, what's worth reflecting on is this: Meghan wasn't simply a woman swept along by destiny, she actively shaped that current. In every crisis that ever came her way, Meghan didn't retreat. She stepped up and faced it head-on. When criticized for her treatment of staff, she launched a podcast centered on amplifying women's voices. When labeled as a divider, she appeared in a Netflix documentary to retell the truth from her own perspective. Every time she was pushed into a defensive corner under negative spotlight, Meghan flipped the switch, lighting up a space where she controlled the narrative. And from there, a larger question emerged: if Meghan and Harry's public image has been built as a modern royal family raising children in the U.S., running philanthropic and media ventures grounded in human values, then what happens if the real royal family element comes into question? If the biological connection between Harry and his children is doubted, would the entire brand they've so meticulously crafted, the one used to sign deals, build trust, and create social influence, still stand strong? Many media experts argue that Meghan is highly strategic. Her successful negotiations for multi-hundred-million-dollar deals with Netflix, a lucrative podcast agreement with Spotify, and the founding of Archewell Foundation all show that she knows how to leverage image powerfully. But with that comes a clear downside. If that image was built on an unverified foundation, the risk of her carefully built career collapsing is enormous. One undeniable example is her children's book, The Bench, which Meghan wrote herself, a story about fatherhood promoted in the media with imagery of Harry and their son. But now, if the public begins to doubt whether the child in that story is biologically Harry's, can the story still hold its original authenticity? Brands collaborate with Meghan because they believe in the image of the Duchess mother. But if the very foundation of that image is shaken, do they still have reason to believe? Another factor that cannot be overlooked is Meghan's consistent refusal to provide any medical information regarding childbirth, avoiding the traditional royal protocol of delivering at the royal family's hospital. She chose a separate path, which in itself is not wrong, but in doing so, she inadvertently left space for countless theories to take root, from claims of fake pregnancies and surrogate use to more dangerous suspicions that the entire family narrative was orchestrated for a strategic personal agenda. And yet it's also important to consider the possibility that Meghan may have been cornered and that controlling the media was the only survival method she knew. As a woman stepping into an institution centuries old like the British royal family, surrounded constantly by the British press and scrutinized by millions, perhaps Meghan had no choice but to build a solid wall of defense around herself. And that wall was total control over her public image. But once that armor begins to crack, as with the case of the DNA test, what remains? Could it be that Meghan had bet everything on her ability to control public opinion and is now facing a game board that's spiraling out of her hands? Or does she still have a strategic card she hasn't played yet in a game where the public has only seen the tip of the iceberg? From the perspective of a media strategist who has closely followed international image-building campaigns, I believe this Meghan does not act impulsively. She doesn't merely react, she plans. And if that is true, then her withdrawal from the meeting room, her silence in the face of accusations, and her refusal to answer any questions about paternity may not be signs of collapse, but rather the next calculated step in a long-term strategy still unfolding. Because when a public figure like Meghan begins to lose authenticity, such as public trust in the truth of her family, the line between victim and manipulator becomes more fragile than ever. The issue is no longer just whether the DNA is correct or not, but lies in a deeper question. Is Meghan being transparent, or is she rewriting the entire story to best serve her own interests? And if what has just come to light is only the visible part of a far deeper truth, then is the public truly ready to confront the hidden layers that have never been spoken aloud? Part 4: Theories surrounding the DNA test. When the truth isn't laid out transparently, the only thing the public can cling to is speculation. And in Meghan Markle's story, the sudden appearance of a DNA test during a closed-door royal meeting paired with Prince Harry's explosive reaction instantly became fertile ground for a flood of theories ranging from plausible to outright extreme. But the real question isn't just about how accurate these theories are, it's why they were able to form and spread so rapidly in the first place. Could it be that Harry and Meghan themselves, through their deliberate choices in how they present their story, have created a void where such unchecked narratives can thrive? The first and most widely circulated theory suggests that Meghan used a surrogate. This rumor isn't new. It dates back to when her pregnancy photos were scrutinized frame by frame. Observers pointed out inconsistencies in the size of Meghan's baby bump, which appeared to fluctuate between public appearances, and commented on her unusually agile movements traits considered inconsistent with a woman in late pregnancy. Additionally, Meghan never followed traditional birthing protocols like other royal women. She chose to deliver at a private hospital, offered no official photos from the delivery room, and never released any medical documents. Legally speaking, that is her personal right and not inherently wrong. But in a royal environment where every action carries symbolic weight, her choices easily became a catalyst for growing doubt. A second theory, far more dramatic in tone, suggests that Meghan may have had a murky relationship in the past with an unidentified man or possibly a previously undisclosed incident, and that one of her two children is not biologically tied to the royal bloodline. According to this line of thinking, this is the real reason why the DNA test shocked Harry so profoundly, triggering a reaction he could not control. While no confirmed evidence supports this, disconnected fragments of information continue to be linked together with suspicion from a leaked recording where Harry allegedly confronts Meghan for lying to him all these years, to her private trips to the U.S. under the guise of visiting family without ever disclosing her itinerary, to the eerie silence from the British media whenever such rumors surface. A third theory, more strategic in tone, posits that Meghan herself orchestrated the release of this controversial DNA test as a calculated step toward a controlled separation from the royal family, or even from Harry. According to this analysis, Harry's slap may not have been a spontaneous act of rage, but rather a piece in a larger sequence of events pre-planned by Meghan. At a time when her personal brand was losing favor, especially after Spotify abruptly terminated their contract, this new crisis could serve as the perfect backdrop for Meghan to return to a role she once played so effectively: the victim. A fresh narrative filled with tears, trauma, and injustice could be a powerful vehicle for her re-emergence, this time not as Duchess Meghan, but as a single mother abandoned by the world and crushed by systemic power. Yet another theory, less discussed, but not implausible, is that it was actually the royal family who quietly instigated the DNA test as a tactical move to eliminate Meghan without having to act directly. In past controversies, from racism allegations to the Netflix revelations exposing internal fractures, the royal family has always maintained silence. But silence doesn't mean inaction. Suppose the request for a DNA test wasn't merely for genetic clarity, but instead a methodical setup to create an exit route that would force Meghan out of the royal orbit. In that case, this could be a meticulously timed ticking bomb. If the results are inconclusive yet suggestive enough to spark suspicion, then public reaction itself becomes the sharpest blade capable of destroying Meghan's public image more swiftly and thoroughly than any courtroom trial. The bigger question remains unanswered. If Meghan has nothing to hide, why didn't she face it head-on? Why hasn't she challenged the DNA results, released medical records, or invited doctors or hospitals to confirm the truth? Why did she choose to walk out of that room instead of staying to fight for her honor? Some say Meghan is simply exhausted, heartbroken, and no longer has the strength to prove anything to anyone. But others believe she won't prove anything because she can't. And that assumption, though never confirmed, is slowly gaining traction in the public's mind. The timing cannot be ignored. The DNA test didn't appear by coincidence. It surfaced at a time when relationships within the family were already strained to a breaking point, when Western media had begun to turn its back, and when Meghan seemed to have no strong cards left to maintain her position. All of this lends weight to the theory of a calculated move, that Meghan may have seen the end coming and is now trying to steer the fallout in a way that minimizes damage to herself. Despite their diversity and contradictions, all these theories converge on one common point. The DNA test, regardless of what it actually says, has become a symbol of total collapse. The collapse of trust, of legitimacy, and perhaps even of what was once seen as unconditional love between Meghan and Harry. In a royal world built on the concept of permanence, from coats of arms to tradition, from protocol to lineage, doubts surrounding a child's paternity are far more than a private matter. It's a shockwave that threatens the very structure of vulnerability that can be exploited by the press and public opinion, and a reason for seemingly solid relationships to be re-evaluated from scratch. And for Meghan, a woman who once declared she was never protected, the most haunting question now may be, in this current chaos where everything is blurred and fragile, who will stand up for her if even the truth is no longer on her side? Part 5. Harry's collapse. If the slap Harry gave Meghan was the breaking point that marked an irreparable explosion, then the collapse within his own mind must have begun long before that moment. A man who once grew up under the dazzling spotlight of royalty, who once served in the military with the pride of a loyal soldier, who had learned to grow up through the tragedy of losing his mother at a young age, had now become the central figure in a media storm, pulled into the thin line between love and truth. And now, when the most serious doubts about the paternity of his children have been placed on the table, what Harry once believed to be untouchable is gradually crumbling right beneath his feet. No one but Harry could truly know what he felt in that moment, holding the DNA test result in his hands. The emotionless words, the cold percentages, the medically neutral terminology said nothing clearly. And yet their mere existence was enough to make a man who had once publicly renounced his royal title for the woman he loved erupt in fury in front of the most senior members of the royal family. That alone suggests the wound was not just to his pride or his public image, but to something even more sacred to a man, his right to be a father, something that should never require proof until someone dares to question it. In truth, the warning signs that Harry was slowly wearing down had already begun to show. Once a man who spoke with fiery passion in humanitarian campaigns, Harry had become noticeably more withdrawn, subdued in his public appearances. His body language beside Meghan began to shift, his gaze lost its confidence, his gestures became hesitant and lacked the assertiveness he once displayed. In the interview promoting his memoir Spare, which should have been his chance to speak for himself, he often hesitated and even evaded questions related to his marriage. The man who once boldly declared he had freed himself from the royal establishment now seemed trapped in the very whirlpool he had unleashed. The public keeps asking, at what point did Harry stop being himself? Was it the moment he nodded in agreement to leave Buckingham Palace with Meghan? Or was it when multi-million-dollar commercial deals started rolling in one after another? Or perhaps it began when he lost control over how his story was told, swept into a narrative titled Modern Family, crafted to court media attention. From the outside, the image still looked picture-perfect: two people in love, raising children, working on community projects. But deep down, did Harry ever truly feel like he created that reality? Or was he simply the face of a plan that never truly belonged to him? That fateful meeting with the DNA test as its catalyst may have been merely the final straw, the culmination of doubts, tensions, and emotions suppressed for far too long. And if the leaked details are true, that Harry not only questioned Meghan about the child, but also about secretly reconnecting with an ex-lover after their marriage, then the pain he endured was no longer about royal protocol, but had pierced the deepest core of his personal life. A husband, a father, a prince who once gave up everything to protect the woman he chose, now forced to confront the feeling of betrayal, not just once, but again and again on multiple levels. It's essential to understand that for someone like Harry, the concept of honor isn't just a public facade for the cameras. It is a foundational part of his inner self, the very reason he once chose to walk away from the rigid rituals of royalty, to leave the military in pursuit of a simpler life in America. But when all those sacrifices are placed next to a brutal reality that his trust may have been betrayed from the start, then what meaning remains in all that he gave up? And we cannot avoid asking, what did Meghan truly know, and what did she choose to keep for herself? If hypothetically she had any relationship outside their marriage before Archie and Lilibet were born, was that an accident, a mistake, or part of a much larger plan Harry was never meant to know? And if Meghan had already suspected that there might be abnormalities in the children's paternity, yet allowed Harry to continue living in the sweet illusion of a perfect family, then that action isn't just deceitful. It's a form of sophisticated control. Of course, all of this remains speculative because none of us have the test results in our hands, and no one was in that room to witness the eyes, the words, or the real reactions of each person. But one thing is undeniable: Harry now stands at the edge of a turning point from which there is no return. From a husband who once fiercely defended his wife against public backlash, he may now become a man waking up inside a pain no one else can bear for him. From a father who once placed unwavering faith in the future of his family, he may now face the brutal truth that perhaps he doesn't even know who he is even within the very home he believed he had built. And if that is true, then the slap wasn't the first blow. It was merely the final echo of a price Harry is now paying for a life he once believed was his choice, but in the end may have been nothing more than a stage built by someone else's hand. Part 6: The Media Fallout. No official statement was issued from Buckingham Palace. No confirmation, no denial, and yet it was precisely that silence that raised the greatest alarm, because in the age of social media, where every move of the powerful is scrutinized down to the smallest detail, silence becomes the most fertile ground for suspicion. An incident as explosive as Prince Harry slapping his wife during a private royal meeting could never be fully contained. And it wasn't. The information, or more precisely the account from a palace staff member about the incident and the DNA results, spread like wildfire through a bone-dry forest. Without needing solid evidence, the media was sucked into a vortex of speculation, gossip, and conjecture at a scale unseen since Meghan's historic interview with Oprah years ago. Within just 48 hours of the story breaking the phrase, Harry slap, Meghan shot to #1 on search engines in the UK, the US, and Canada. On TikTok, related videos surpassed 120 million views. On Reddit, tens of thousands of discussion threads exploded overnight. YouTube channels that cover royal affairs reported viewership increases of 3 to 5 times their usual numbers. What was once meant to remain behind closed doors had now become public spectacle, where anyone could voice opinions, draw conclusions, and speculate as they pleased. And once again, Meghan found herself at the center of it all, not because of her race, her background, or her lifestyle, but because of the one question no one wanted to ask out loud. Is she hiding something? What made the situation even more complicated was Meghan's strange silence. Unlike previous controversies, this time there was no response video, no emotional Instagram post, not even a press release from Archewell. That absence of reaction led the public to suspect rather than sympathize. In modern media, narrative control is the ultimate weapon. But this time, Meghan, once hailed as a master storyteller, appeared to have dropped her most vital strategic card. A wave of media consequences followed almost instantly. Partners who had previously worked with Meghan began to distance themselves. A journalist from The Hollywood Reporter revealed that Netflix had paused all Meghan and Harry-related content for 2025 until the situation becomes clearer. Spotify, the platform that once hosted Meghan's podcast Archetypes, quietly removed all associated recommendations from its homepage. In the U.S., Archewell Foundation, the nonprofit co-founded by the couple, lost two major strategic collaborators on a global initiative. The official reason was short but damning media risk. To sponsors, an unstable image equals an uncontrollable liability. In a system built on trust, even an unverified rumor can unravel donations, endorsement deals, and potential partnerships. A source in California disclosed that Archewell was facing delayed payments for operating expenses after its banking partner requested a full financial transparency audit. Moreover, several senior staff members at the organization reportedly submitted their resignations with internal documents citing the same succinct reason: lack of clear strategic direction. To the public, Meghan is no longer the face of bold transformation, no longer the emblem of a modern duchess challenging the status quo. Instead, she is rapidly becoming a symbol of doubt. Forgotten questions are now resurfacing. Did Meghan actually give birth to Archie? Were the inconsistencies in previous interviews honest mistakes or deliberate obfuscation? Was royal life truly as unbearable as she claimed, or were those stories crafted for dramatic media impact? And the most troubling question of all, if paternity is even remotely in doubt, does the entire image of a modern family that she and Harry so carefully constructed still hold any meaning? British media continued their usual tactic: silence, but in this case, that silence only fanned the flames. The Times published an editorial without naming names, but the headline was a thunderclap: "When icons fall, who takes the blame?" Meanwhile, American media, once Meghan's most loyal ally, began shifting tone. Phrases like difficult to verify, inconsistent narrative, and concealed truths began cropping up across headlines. And for the first time since 2020, Meghan Markle's name was no longer accompanied by terms like soft power feminist icon or victim of tradition. Now the question is no longer what happened, but how will Meghan respond? She could choose to speak up, but doing so would require presenting evidence, possibly even revealing personal matters, such as medical records, DNA results, or family financial disclosures. She could also choose to remain silent, but the price would be steep. Her public image locked in limbo, her media empire crumbling, and the loss of her sharpest weapon, the empathy of her audience. And Harry cannot be left out of the conversation. Although many now see him as the victim of that fateful meeting, his image is also being re-examined. Was he merely led all this time, or was he always a willing participant in an elaborate media strategy from the very beginning? His shift from staunch defender of his wife to a man driven to a physical outburst has fractured public support and triggered deep divisions among once loyal supporters. As all these questions continue to hang in the air unanswered, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: Meghan Markle is now facing the greatest challenge of her public life. Not from the royal family, not even necessarily from Harry, but from the very trust she once worked so hard to build with the world and now risks losing entirely all because of a void that has yet to be filled with the truth. Truth has rarely been something easy to embrace, especially when it threatens to unravel the very foundation of trust we once believed was unshakable. The ongoing saga surrounding Meghan, Harry, and the British royal family appears to hold far more layers than what's currently been revealed. Yet one thing is becoming undeniably clear: the public is waking up. What do you make of that DNA result of Prince Harry's explosive reaction, and of Meghan Markle's true persona, not the version filtered through glossy headlines or polished press releases, but the one behind closed doors? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to hit like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss a single update on this controversy that's gripping the world. We'll be following every new development as it unfolds, and you definitely don't want to be left behind.